My name is Patrick Long. My pronouns are he, him, his. I work in academic advising at Tulane University. I would say a little bit about myself is that I think of myself as an educator first and probably a coach second. I would say that I get to inhabit this fun space where my role isn't to really tell students what to do, but to help them figure out what their story is supposed to be and really facilitate their exploration, their understanding, and kind of identify, are there any gaps in their understanding and their resources or their support that we can together collaborate on filling so that they feel both confident in their own decision making and they can reach their goals during their time in university and also after. I kind of came to coaching through like a very odd way. This program that I completed, I didn't actually seek it out outright. I had a contact within the university that had been a coach and had done this training, and she and I have been talking a lot about what is the theory behind the work that we do. And so I constantly felt like I was missing like a theoretical backbone to like how I approach working with students. And I think that was always the part when I'd worked with students. I'd worked in advising for several years. I always felt like I didn't have that theory to fall back on as I had in previous roles. And so I had just been kind of asking around about getting maybe some theory training. And I approached the person who's the director of success coaching about just joining in for some of her trainings. And then as she was leaving the role, one of the last things she did is she just kind of just signed me up for this class. And it felt really significant because in the moment I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm doing a 6-month class. That's way more than I was like asking for. But then it was so great to just have an opportunity for it to be so structured. And I came about it in an odd way, but I really like how it kind of fell apart or fell together, I should say. I noticed in my conversations with students prior to doing the coach training, I kept coming across these interactions where I was just being so procedural and so process oriented. And I had to stop myself in interactions with students where I realized, oh, this person just wants a conversation. They want space to just exist. And I'm so caught up in like, okay, what classes do you need next semester? Are you on track for graduation? And so it really inspired me to get into coaching, was thinking back to those roles that I had before that weren't so information heavy, and I got to just facilitate conversation. I think looking back now, I was coaching and just didn't realize it yet. I thought about the ease and how natural that felt and how much I felt more confident what I was doing when I was just facilitating a conversation versus directing it. And so what really inspired me to do coaching was seeing coaching as an avenue to get back to that, what I almost feel like is my best self as a professional, being able to show up comfortably in a space. And again, like I said before, not tell them what to do, but maybe to create space for some of them the first time to feel confident in making their own story. So that, I guess to sum it up a bit, really what inspired me to get more into coaching is finding a way that I could tap more into that natural facilitator mindset that I've always had in roles that I kind of lost along the way as I moved into different types of positions. So at Tulane, we actually have a pretty comprehensive coaching model. So at a lot of universities, they have more blended advisors and coaches. We actually have a whole separate office for success coaching. So we have in the same department, we're in the same division, basically a sister office, the success coaching team. Undergraduate advising, we do a lot of referrals and connections and partnerships with other parts of campus. So we have dedicated coaches on campus, which is great. Students have that as their go-to. They go through the coach training EDU themselves. And then advising, we've been kind of expanding some of our offices. So I help manage the first year advising team. And so we're actually having all of the first year advisors go through the same coaching training, just because a lot of what we do dealing in the first year is transition. And so much of the conversations aren't really about what do I have to take if I'm a psych major. It's starting there, but then it's so much deeper. Like, how are you dealing with your transition? How are you dealing with being away from home? What does independence feel like? How are you balancing things? As much as I can speak to it as a person who's not running the vision, I would say my impression about the vision at the school is that students have multiple avenues of support that they can go to. I like to joke with my students that there sometimes feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen. But in reality, we're all approaching their experience and their support differently. So a lot of my role is a lot more focused on degree progress, retention. However, there are coaching elements that come into that. So it's weaving the coaching elements into the other parts other support services so that they're not only feeling coaching and getting the benefits and the support systems from that coach session. Like if they go to success coaches for time management or specific tasks, that's great. But if we are also training our other support staff on campus that work in tandem with success to also have coaching based skill sets, we can tee things up better. We can manage better conversations. We can be more effective in the work that we do so that coaching isn't something that happens in isolation. It's something we're all kind of doing with students together. A couple things. One, I feel this is cliche to say, but really trust the process and I guess lean into the messiness. I think when I started the coach training, it was really beneficial to start out with my practice clients being people that were kind of more in my professional network, not the types of clients I wanted to work with. Because when I brought in some friends who had counseling backgrounds, some friends that I worked with, people that had done coaching or therapy related things before, they'd done interactions that were more reflection based. So coaching wasn't that foreign to them. That was such an easier starting point. And I think it was nice to allow myself to lean into it being messy and not being good. Because by the time that I had gotten enough training and coaching that I was pulling in clients from the populations that I actually wanted to work with, I felt so much more confident because I'd started with people that weren't going to judge me, that weren't the clients I was trying to impress. And it was by letting myself be really messy and trusting that I would figure out over time. By the time actually towards the second half of the class, I started pulling in student clients. It was so much easier and I had understood more of the basics of coaching. So then when I had to apply it to the population I want to work with, I didn't feel as much pressure. Oh, I think the coaching, it's almost hard to digest down the impact of coaching with students. I think as a resource on campus, like us having coaching as an option is a really good half step between what you could get from like an academic advisor and what you can get from a mental health coach. There's so many things in between those resources where coaching really fits that need. Like maybe it's not that like, yeah, if you have extreme anxiety, a mental health counselor would be a really good person for you. But if you're just anxious about how to approach time management, a coach can really like bring that specialized focus without like overdoing it, so to speak. I think it's great on our campus to have that resource. So when I have a student who's really struggling, I like that I have so many other options I can refer them to. And I have people I can trust because I've done this training and I know that team. I know what those students are going to get from those interactions. So it's really helpful for me as a professional to be able to offer that service. And then anecdotally, when I think of the students that I worked with, I've seen a lot of how coaching kind of train students to think about themselves differently. And through the process of going through coaching, I saw one of my own coaching clients get so much better about being reflective. And he even pointed out in one of our sessions, he said, oh, the more I do this coaching, the more I feel like I'm learning how to coach myself. And it's like the more I'd ask him questions, he would come in and say, oh yeah, the other day I was thinking, I was really anxious about X, Y, and Z, but then I remember how you would ask me this question. And so I asked myself that question and the answer didn't make sense. So here I am. So I guess the final thing I add is I think the presence of coaching is great for students as a resource, but I think the impact I've noticed is that through coaching, students have learned how to kind of coach themselves towards more agency and more self-efficacy. I work in undergraduate advising, but recently I've stepped into more of a manager role. And when I first started the coach training process, I was very much focused on how I assumed it would elevate or supplement my advising practice. And definitely has done that. Like it changes how I approach questions. I set agendas very differently now after doing coaching. I ask better questions with students, but where I've seen the most impact is as I've moved into a leadership role. And if I'm dealing with supervising people, I found myself time and time again when I was first starting supervising, the kind of the toolbox I was pulling from wasn't my background in advising. I was pulling from my coach training. I was asking questions and framing things from a coaching perspective. And so I feel like my long-term professional goals as it relates to coaching is I want to continue doing more work so it impacts how I operate as a manager and as a supervisor. And so I don't know what coaching is going to look like me formally moving forward, but it's something that I just want to keep incorporating as I move up into positions that have to handle larger issues, really taking a coaching mindset when I'm working with other faculty, with other staff, with parents, families, and students. I learned things that I kind of already knew, but I think I really drove home. Um, I think something I learned about myself is that, like a lot of us, can be a little too hard on myself and in ways that are unrealistic. Like when you start to do that kind of coaching thing where you're teasing apart the why and the how behind things, you're like, oh, actually, that is unrealistic. The way that I'm setting up these boundaries and expectations for myself, like that's not helpful. That's potentially damaging. I think I've learned to be a lot more in a growth mindset, and I think also what I've learned about myself is that not only can I show up as a coach and support for other people, but I can pull those skills back internally for coaching myself through things. So I'd say for the success team broadly, the coach training EDU creates a consistency in all the training of staff. So I think you have a staff members that all have a kind of a similar way of approaching things, a similar theory, a similar kind of lingo that they operate with. And then they can continue to grow together because since they all have similar training and backgrounds and vocabulary and knowledge, they can continue internally to grow upon that as a kind of a collective. And then what I hope it does for the first year advising team that I operate with is that I'm hoping it'll really empower my team members to be able to really sit with students through difficult conversations. I think so often in advising, you get to the business of referrals. And again, like there's a point to where we want to push students into the correct resource, but there's so much we can start them with. Like I really want to give students 10% of that process before I push them somewhere else. So my hope is that as my team members who are currently going through the training work through it, that they're going to be more confident in their roles as advisors and just more capable of helping students deal with more difficult and sometimes more challenging questions that don't have easy answers. Honestly, any moment where Sonia asks us a question feels transformative. I can't even imagine what sort of presence she has in person because virtually it's just like, who is this person? She's everything I want to be when I grow up. I think some of the most transformative moments, it's weird because a lot of tiny things come up. It's not like, oh, there's this one day where someone asks this like wild question, but there's so many tiny moments I think of where we would just be doing what I thought was, oh, it's just a coaching exercise. We're just gonna talk about things I have planned. And then through the process of practicing, you would just get this like wild revelation. Like, oh, this is deeper than I thought it was. I was just here talking about how I was trying to redecorate my house. And suddenly I got this whole discussion about community and like how I want like my space to reflect like the people in my life. We had this deep discussion. And it started with me saying, you know what, I really need to decorate my house. And that's how it started. And it was like funny. I have all these like little moments that come to mind where we would just be doing a coaching exercise in the class and suddenly it would get really deep for one of us. And we're like, oh, okay. Wasn't anticipating that on my Thursday morning. What I really enjoyed about the class is really how it was structured. I think it was a good blend of, we had readings, we had kind of assignments we could work through. I liked how we had a kind of structure of like, here's the base amount of information you're going to need to prepare for class, but also all these supplemental things. I wasn't always the best person at using the supplemental, but I've kind of gone back and gone through some of them where it's recordings, videos, podcasts. So it was nice if there's a topic where you couldn't quite wrap your head around, you had extra things you could explore, but it was still all very manageable. And I enjoyed how so much of our classes were very active. So we would have those discussions, the larger group, and then really doing a lot of practice. And then on top of that, I think kind of forcing us to also start meeting with clients earlier and start having those interactions before we learned most of the content really got us out of our comfort zones. I think if we had had the whole class and then did like the overviews and then did the clients, we would have gotten really boxed in. I think the fact that maybe a third into the class, we started talking to clients was really helpful because we had just enough to get started, but not so much that we were locked into like, this is how I coach and only this way.